Hello, everybody. Honourable Minister Dr. Alex Alanson, esteemed panellists, I'd like to convey my warmest greetings and sincere thanks for joining us today. I'd also like to welcome everyone in the audience. Thank you so much for joining us for an extra special Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce webinar today. I'm truly excited to bring you an event around this exemplary Commonwealth-associated jurisdiction, and I'm honoured to present such a dynamic, esteemed and distinguished panel of speakers. I'd particularly like to thank my friend Larry Keenan, the founder and senior partner of Lawrence Keenan Advocates and Solicitors in the Isle of Man. It's a law firm, and I've known Larry for many years through the international legal network, Legal Link. Larry's been the driving force in bringing this wonderful Isle of Man panel together, and I'm looking forward to hearing his overview of the Isle of Man's legal system, which underpins the Isle of Man's success. So the Isle of Man is a British Crown dependency. It's located in the heart of the British Isles. It has a rich cultural history dating back to 6500 BC. It's home to the Parliament of Tynwald, the oldest known democratically elected parliament, which underscores the political stability of the highly diverse economy of the Isle of Man. It's had consistent economic growth in the past 30 years with an almost uninterrupted AA1 rating from Moody's, a national budget surplus, and a GDP per capita that ranked 5th globally in 2019. The Isle of Man is well known for being a leading financial jurisdiction. It's been dubbed the best international finance centre 4 times by the International Investment Fund and Product Awards. Previously, most recently in 2022, the island won 2 industry awards at the 2022 International Investment Awards, which were held virtually earlier this month. For one, it was named the best at Excellence in Innovation within International Finance Centres, and for the second, the island's official executive agency, Finance Isle of Man, was awarded first place for the International Campaign of the Year award for the Natural Choice campaign, promoting the island as a jurisdiction of choice for excellence in finance. Currently, over 400 reputable financial services companies have ongoing operations there, several of which are headquartered on the island. With 11 banking groups and deposits of £40 million, the island specialises in providing banking services to expats and international corporates, including commercial lending to UK companies and on UK property. The jurisdiction manages over 293 funds, worth £18.2 billion, specialising in the wealth management of high net worth individuals and private and family offices, owing largely to its robust and expansive network of top-tier fiduciary funds and wealth management experts. The island has recently been given the title of safest place in the British Isles, with excellent facilities, infrastructure, healthcare and education. The beautiful ecosystem of the island is the reason why it's the only jurisdiction to be given the status of being a UNESCO biosphere. As such, it's not surprising that 86% of residents report having an excellent quality of life. Apart from ideal living standards, it's also ideal for setting up or relocating vibrant businesses, considering its attractive and simple tax regime with 0 capital gains tax, withholding tax, or wealth taxes. Well, much more can be said about the spectacular achievements of the Isle of Man, and I'm very excited to delve deep into this and understand what makes the Isle of Man such a special place today. And I'm looking forward to hearing from our impressive panel of speakers. But first, we're going to hear an address from the Treasury Minister of the Isle of Man, the Honourable Dr. Alex Alanson. Impressively, Dr. Alanson has more letters after his name than I can read out. He's an experienced medical doctor, and he practiced in Australia and London before moving to the Isle of Man. Prior to becoming the Treasury Minister, Dr. Alanson served in various positions in the House, including as the chair of the Manx Utilities Authority. In 2020, Alanson was appointed to the Council of Ministers as the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture Minister by Chief Minister Howard Quayle. He's also chair of the Manx Utilities Board. So let's hear from Dr. Alanson with his keynote address.
Hello, my name's Dr. Alex Alanson, and I'm the Treasury Minister for the Isle of Man Government. I'm delighted to be able to address the Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce today. The Isle of Man is a self-governing crown dependency situated in the middle of the Irish Sea. And because of that, we have key connections to the island of Ireland and the United Kingdom, whilst being independent both of government and thought. We have a well-regulated financial sector and pride ourselves in terms of our approachability and connectivity with business. We have a diverse economy spanning financial services, a mature gaming sector, but also a specialist manufacturing sector. We treasure what we have, but we want to do more. We want to develop emerging markets and emerging sectors such as esports, biomed, and medicinal cannabis. One of the things we treasure most is our people. We have an economic strategy which will invest in health, education and infrastructure, but create the right skills environment, both for companies we have based with us at the moment, but also with other entrepreneurs who want to come and join us on our passage to success. One of the key aspects of the Isle of Man is its independence. We have a stable economy, growing with increasing GDP, but also a stable political environment and a well-regulated system whereby we can adapt and adjust to whatever the world may throw at us. One of the aspects that we want to do after COVID is re-establish our relationships with old friends, but also make new relationships to reach out to the world to make sure that they know we are open for business. We are a low tax jurisdiction in terms of income tax, have zero corporation tax, but also none of the wealth taxes such as capital gains or inheritance tax. So we are now an ideal base for you to come and join us in our passage to success. We pride ourselves with safety, security, but also stability. And as we move forward together to grow our economy, to grow our active population, what I'd like to do is welcome you to come and visit. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much to Dr. Allinson. That was an upbeat note on which to kick off. Now to introduce our panel. They'll also be briefly introducing themselves. First, we're going to be hearing from the charming Yash Naidu, who's an International Business Development Manager with Nedbank Group, which he joined in 2010. Yash has 15 years experience in wealth management and was previously head of international for South Africa's Central Region. Yash is now responsible for business development with a focus on South Africa, and he's based in the Isle of Man. Then we'll hear from David Bush, who joined FIM Capital in March 2022 and has over 28 years experience in international financial services, having worked at senior levels in the Channel Islands, South Africa, Barbados, as well as the Isle of Man. David's career started as a graduate trainee with an international private bank, which led to specializing in his main passion, the management of investment assets. Over his career, David has managed portfolios for high net worth individuals, trusts, foundations, international company subsidiaries, and also government reserves. Next will be Andy Morgan, who is CEO at Affinity Group, a corporate service provider with offices in the Isle of Man, Malta, and the Cayman Islands. Andy's responsible for overseeing the development of the group across all jurisdictions and has over 15 years' experience working within the offshore business environment. Andy developed expert knowledge in bespoke structuring across a range of sectors, including yachting, e-gaming, and fintech. After that, we'll hear from my good friend Larry Keenan, who graduated from the University of Dundee in 1987, having studied English and Scots law. After 15 years in the Scottish Police, he moved to the Isle of Man, where his family came from. He was called to the Manx Bar in 1990 and was admitted as an English solicitor in 1996. Lawrence Keenan Advocates and Solicitors, his firm was established in January 1992. It's a full-service Isle of Man practice. Larry's own areas of practice cover a wide range of legal services, non-contentious, commercial, contentious civil law, matrimonial law, banking, private client, and prosecution work. Finally, we'll be hearing from Martin Hall. Martin joined ATLA in 2019, and he sits on the board of the fiduciaries and pension divisions. His role includes managing new and existing client relationships and strategy development for the group. Martin has worked in the island's finance industry in his entire career, originally starting out with the Isle of Man government, then moving into the private sector some years later. The panel is moderated over in the Isle of Man by Paul Moulton. Many thanks to Paul for his help. So over now to the panel in the Isle of Man.
Thank you, Julia, and welcome to the Isle of Man. We have a distinguished panel in front of us here today that are going to be talking to us later, but they've also got their presentations to deliver. So let's start the proceedings by introducing the panel to you. Over to you, Yash.
Hi, my name is Yash. I'm pleased to be part of this panel, and I'm from Nedbank Private Wealth. My role is International Business Development Manager. I've had 15 years of experience within wealth management. And here today I'm going to be talking about internationally mobile families and key considerations before making that big move.
Hello, I'm David Bush from FIM Capital here on the Isle of Man. I'm here today to talk to you about investment content within international pensions.
Hi, I'm Andy Morgan. I'm CEO of Affinity Group in the Isle of Man. I've been with the company since 2008 and working in the maritime space since 2003. And I'm here to talk about maritime structuring through the Isle of Man.
Hello, I'm Larry Keenan of Lawrence Keenan Advocates, a firm that's been established 32 years. I'm here today to talk about the Isle of Man, its legal systems and its interaction with the different industries and sectors, and also how you might relocate to the Isle of Man, if that's your wish.
Hello, my name is Martin Hall. I'm a Director of Outlet Retirement Solutions. I'm here today to talk about retirement solutions and the pension environment on the Isle of Man, and I'm a proud Manxman.
So as I said, we'll be having a Q&A session at the end of the presentations. But first of all, it's over to Yash.
Hi. As mentioned a little earlier, I'm here to cover a few key considerations before making that big move or relocating. And of course, I'd just like to start with providing a brief introduction in terms of who is Nedbank Private Wealth. And in terms of that, Nedbank Private Wealth is based in the Isle of Man. This is our major booking center. We've been around since 1987. And interestingly, we have offices both in the Isle of Man, Jersey, London, Dubai, and of course, South Africa. And in terms of our offering, our key focus areas are those clients that are in the 1 to 20 million asset space, where we are able to provide them with wealth management, banking, and advice within the wealth management space. We focused on exceptional service with dedicated wealth advisory team. And interestingly, 40% of the advisors within the bank have over 10 years of experience with the institution. So there's great longevity within that particular team. That highly qualified team is supported by a good array of support consultants who themselves hold client relationships as well. And the business itself focuses on leading with wealth planning. And I'll get into that into a bit more detail, but just as a once over, this focuses on a client's planning towards either relocation, legacy planning, retirement planning, and ensuring that we are able to encapsulate those requirements quite effectively. The financial strength of the business is quite solid. We are 100% owned by Nedbank Group, and that is 28,000 employees with 18 billion assets under management, and 4.9 of those assets are managed via the international business in the Northern Hemisphere. To give credence to the work that we've done, there's a host of awards that we have actually won as well. More recently, which was the PAM Awards in terms of total wealth planning, high net worth over 1 million. We've been rated as best private bank in the City of London Wealth Management Awards more recently, and as I mentioned, 8 years running now. And there's a host of these, but hopefully that gives you a bit of context to us as a business. I spoke a little bit earlier about wealth planning, and in the context of families relocating or moving across the globe, we know that people are moving more and more, and internationally mobile families have lots to think about, when making those big moves. And we feel that process really starts with wealth planning. And the process that we actually follow is firstly to do a wealth check with our clients, to really understand their finances, what they're looking to achieve, what are the gaps and the risks, so that we can provide them with the effective advice. But at the core of this is understanding, what is the purpose of the wealth when it comes to wealth planning generically. And that goes to, is it, to take care of kids specifically, inheritance? Is it for philanthropic needs? Whatever it may be, understanding that purpose of the wealth is of paramount importance. And then we follow a goal-based planning exercise. And this basically means that we will go ahead and really have a look at what you're trying to achieve and then reverse engineer from there to determine, what type of portfolio investment solution or arrangements need to be made to meet those particular goals. We'd like to take, your legacies and your values into account when structuring these solutions for you. And once everything's neatly tied up in a plan, we can go ahead and monitor these portfolios and review them on a regular basis to ensure that we meeting those goals. Because if there's one certainty, is that the world is full of uncertainty, and these regular reviews are really, really important. Closer to our topic, in terms of pre-residency planning, there's quite a few important things to take into mind. And one of them is, of course, the timing of tax residence. Depending on which country you're moving to and their tax regime, it's really important to ensure that from a timing perspective, you understand the tax implications on both sides. And that's where we would usually work with tax specialists in each of these jurisdictions to make that move as seamless as possible. In terms of domicile status, specifically for UK citizens, only, here that's really important in terms of what is your plan. Is it permanent? Is it a transient move? What may that move hold for you? And really understanding that and taking note of that is important. We have a look at the double tax treaty agreements, working very closely with your tax advisors. And of course, from there, I spoke about wealth planning, creating those cash flows to really understand what are the needs for that relocation, and setting that out in a cash flow to ensure that we are able to comfortably meet those financial commitments that will actually come about. In many cases, probably the most important thing for most family members is really considering, where am I going to live? What type of property do I need? And am I going to be renting, or am I going to be purchasing a property? And advice and assistance in that area is something that we can plan towards as well. One thing that people do forget about that's really important is ensuring, from a will and succession planning perspective, you are able to ensure that wills are taken care of in each of those jurisdictions where you have assets. So these are some of the key things that we would discuss in a pre-residency discussion. And it's really important to take these into account well in advance of that particular move. Now, most people want to know, well, great, I do have a bit of wealth and I do need to invest it to be able to, create those cash flow requirements that I need. It's hard to earn money, and you want to ensure that it's invested appropriately. And just to unpack a bit about our investment solutions, I think it's worth mentioning that we follow a multi-manager approach. So we blend excellent managers together to ensure that we get to different areas of the market, be it a geographical allocation that we're concerned about, or if it is, of course, a concern about getting exposure to certain types of investing. We are global investors and with no home bias, and we have a distinct alternative investment built into our solutions. We have an active currency overlay, and being a bank, that's quite useful to ensure that we don't take a risk that we don't need to. And in terms of a booking platform and global wealth, making sure that you have access to place your wealth in good tax neutral jurisdictions as part of that investment option is quite important. I spoke about lending, and just to briefly encapsulate lending, there's a range of lending solutions available to clients where we would have a look at going ahead at buy-to-lets if it's just international exposure that you're looking for, or if you're going to be living in a property, to ensure that a regulated mortgage is available to you, and we are able to facilitate that for UK properties specifically. In some cases, portfolio-backed lending is also required. So we can have a look at the wealth that is being used for that relocation and provide some lending opportunities on the back of that, because that may be something that's required from a lending perspective. And probably one of the most important things is, of course, your banking requirements. We are able to offer a multi-currency bank account, fixed-term deposits, foreign exchange solutions across 15 major currencies that allows you to move assets or cash around the globe as you require. And these come with Visa cards in sterling, euro, and US dollars. And you are easily able to interact with this using our mobile app. So that covers briefly some of the key requirements. And, we can go into a bit of questions later on and discuss that in further detail. Thank you for listening to me. I'd like to hand over to David from FIM Capital.
Hello, everybody. I hope everyone is well. A warm welcome from the Isle of Man. I'd like to introduce FIM Capital and basically the asset management investment services for specifically pension structures. A quick run over FIM Capital, established in the Isle of Man, Manx Company in 2006, privately owned by local shareholders. The business has over 4 billion of assets under management and administration, of which 25-30% is the discretionary asset management side that I'll go into today. Licensed on the island, audited by KPMG, and ultimately part of a growing group on the Isle of Man. I think one of the things a lot of people ask us coming from the Isle of Man, we have a proud Manxman on the panel and many other esteemed Manx people on the panel, is that, why the Isle of Man? And it's something for somebody. I've worked in Barbados, Johannesburg, Channel Islands, and the Isle of Man. And one of the biggest things for the Isle of Man is it's bang in the centre of where you want to be. If we want to get to Europe, we're pretty quick. If we want to get to the US, we're not too quick, but we're still quick. If we want to get down to South Africa, it's not too far away. And ultimately in Asia / Hong Kong, we wake up as your day finishes, but we still get to park everything in America before we go to bed, so you can leave it in our good hands. The Isle of Man has as a jurisdiction lots of professional businesses, lots of excellent professionals on the island. And I think a little known fact is that, when you look at the island, there's hundreds of billions of pounds worth of assets on the island across all these different services that you'll hear about today, which is obviously why you're listening. In terms of your pension, which is why I'm here to talk today, why would I invest in my own pension? To grow it. It's quite simple. The aspiration is to actually take an asset and account for inflation. You want your pension to be well looked after. Nobody can guarantee that state pensions are there or will be there or possibly could be there in the future. There's also that aspect of income in retirement to keep your standard of life similar, if not the same as what you were when you worked. It helps you diversify your asset base. A lot of times pensions should be looked at to sit alongside other assets, and Andy's going to talk about yachts, Martin's going to talk about structures, Yash has been talking about the whole wealth planning journey, which is really, really important. But on the slides you'll see in front of you today is that it's all part of a big game plan and a long-term game plan. And where you are on that journey is really important to us as asset managers to say how we think you should manage that game plan. And at the very bottom of the pack, you'll see what would have happened to a dollar if it was invested in the world back 20, 30 years. It doesn't matter which time frame we take, just as long as it's not the COVID time frame. I'll put that caveat into the presentation today. Options and costs. This is once again, in terms of this forum, a very, very wide subject. And it comes down to whether your pension needs to be actively managed or passively managed. And that's the big thing in the investment management industry. AI, bots, automated systems can manage money very, very cheaply. Whereas actual analysts and qualified individuals choosing a Microsoft over a Johnson & Johnson, over a Diageo, over a Unilever is unfortunately expensive, and because of inflation it's becoming more expensive. That's a heads up on what's happening in the asset management industry. So if you want active, it's going to be more expensive than passive. It just goes to stand to reason. The other side of it as well is that the personal relationships that people with assets of size, that personal relationship is something that's becoming less and less available to many, because on the other side of the equation, artificial intelligence can manage portfolios in a very efficient and low-cost fashion. So the options: do you want a human relationship or do you want an AI relationship? That's down to personal choice. We can manage high-risk assets, we can manage medium-risk assets, and we can manage low-risk assets. The caveat to that would be one of the safest assets at the start of this year would have been a government bond, and about halfway through the year, one of the unsafest assets this year would have been a government bond, on the back of 2/3 prime ministers and about as long as it takes for one to mature. Basically, in terms of the asset styles, we can build bespoke portfolios to cater for the most conservative of people. Very, very thankfully for us, Mr. Powell will pay you a good 4% to sit in US dollars at the moment, whereas a year ago he would have given you nothing. And other economies are following suit. So it's not a zero game to be low stroke, no risk at the moment. But that lovely thing called inflation's always chasing your tail. Basically, in terms of, from our point of view, it's a pension that's yours, and you get to choose what the cost structure of the pension is, what the provider of the pension is, what's going to work best for you, and that would be in conjunction with accountants and tax advisors to make sure that your footprint's in the right structure at the right time. Why should you invest in a pension? I think it would be, in terms of where we are now with inflation, it would be a relatively poor move to leave it sitting doing nothing for your lifetime, because you want to grow and you want it to grow with you. $1 today isn't going to be $1 in 2050. £1, €1 is the same sort of context. Diversification, as we mentioned there before, you want to get different asset classes, you want to get different styles, you want to have exposure to different assets, because your overall holistic sort of risk profile should be in line with what your end game is. The other thing that I'm not a particular professional in, and the other panelists will speak more proficiently about, is that transferability of a pension is relatively easy, as opposed to having a box of cash hiding somewhere, or basically a bank account that's dematerialized with no other signatory on it. So from your point of view, there are reasons to have succession planning, beneficiaries, and a structure that's more transferable than maybe other structures would be. You can have different currencies in your pension. You don't just need to hold it in your earnings currency. And ultimately, from our point of view, you can choose with a pension how it's going to go in terms of all those options that we've mentioned before. So why should you invest? You want it to grow. You want it to be tax efficient. You want to pass it on if you don't actually want to spend it. You want it to basically provide an income when you retire. There's so many reasons. Finally, in terms of FIM, because I've got one more slide after this, would be, with investment managers, you want to make sure you've got an investment manager who researches, analyzes, spends the time and effort looking at the markets, looking at whether gold's got a benefit over a 2-year treasury, over a piece of property, over a pharmaceutical company in Switzerland. It's got to be lots of ideas coming to the table, but the collegiate approach to your pension needs to be in place. It needs to be focused, it needs to be disciplined, and it needs to be based on a risk sort of reward type structure. That's what our company does. And as a little sort of curveball, I'm also on the Institute of Directors Committee here in the Isle of Man. Very, very important to me that we have quality directors on the island who've basically demonstrated through experience, qualifications and time their value to the Isle of Man as a reputable, well-governed and strong jurisdiction. For anybody who's in the IOD in Hong Kong, rest assured the branch here is active. It is part of the Royal Charter, as you will be as well. And the objectives here remain the same. We're here to basically try and influence decision makers on the island, i.e. the government, in terms of legislation and oversight. We're here to connect directors with one another, so you'll have a family when you come this side to basically reacquaint with the IOD on this side. And also professional development. If you're in the middle of professional development at the moment with the Institute of Directors, you can continue that this side. So if you're in certificate paper number 2, you can do number 3 here, number 4 here, you can do diploma here, you can get chartered here. So on the Isle of Man's, armoury, we have a branch of the Institute of Directors, and if you decide to get in touch, basically when you come over to the island, we'd more than welcome you as a member of the community. And that's about it for me. And what I'd like to do is hand you over to Andy from Affinity.
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. I'm Andy Morgan, CEO of Affinity Group in the Isle of Man. I've been CEO since 2019 and joined the company in 2008. I'm responsible for the oversight of all of our activities across all of our jurisdictions, which includes Isle of Man, Malta, and Cayman Islands. Affinity were formed in 2004 and initially focused solely on the structuring of luxury assets, including super yachts and aircraft. Over recent years, we've diversified into multiple sectors across several jurisdictions. Our ethos is to provide a personal approach to corporate, digital, and private wealth services. Our key sectors include digital, e-gaming, esports, and fintech, private wealth, aviation, multi-family office and yachting, and corporate, cannabis, escrow services, and traditional trust and company services. I'm here to discuss the yachting sector in the Isle of Man and why someone would register their super yacht on the island. The Isle of Man has a strong maritime hub with several interests including crew management, technical management, maritime insurance, financing, legal services, and corporate services, which is what we do. Our role at Affinity is to form the ownership structures for yachts, and beyond that, assist with the various day-to-day operations of the yacht, including dealing with VAT planning and importations. The Isle of Man Ship Registry was formed in 1984 and is the 17th largest ship registry in the world, with over 800 vessels weighing 12.6 million in gross tonnage. This includes merchant ships, tankers, fishing vessels, and super yachts. The Isle of Man is a world-class red ensign flag with low cost, low tax, and excellent quality of service. Quality of service is imperative in the yachting space, with quick turnaround times for transactions and issue of endorsements and crew documentation in particular. On to the structuring of super yachts. Over 80% of the world's yachts are registered on the red ensign flag, and it's recognised throughout the industry as a quality flag. Following Brexit, new opportunities have presented themselves to the Isle of Man, and it's now possible to structure temporary admission schemes on island. This means for non-EU resident clients, owning assets through the Isle of Man, owning super yachts through the Isle of Man, and registering on island can be used to facilitate the temporary clearance of yachts into Europe for up to 18-month periods of time. Our yachting services include the implementation of tax-efficient ownership structures, VAT compliance and administration, multi-jurisdictional EU VAT registrations, handling all day-to-day matters on board the yacht, and dealing with the day-to-day operations. Thank you for listening. At this point in time, I'd like to hand over to Larry Keenan of Lawrence Keenan Advocates, who's going to speak about legal matters in the Isle of Man.
Thanks, Andy. The Isle of Man is one of 3 crown dependencies within the British Isles. The other 2 are Jersey and Guernsey. We're quite distinctly different from the other 2, and this is not just on rivalry, is that our link to the UK is more driven by a common customs area, and we're also part of the VAT area. You heard Andy talking about the VAT, and that's an important part if you're providing services through the Eurovat area. Our court system is similar to those existing throughout the Commonwealth. We have a common heritage by being common law jurisdictions. The Isle of Man is not part of the Commonwealth. The membership is really through the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. Our politicians actively engage with that. And so we'll have visitors from different parts of the Commonwealth to the island in a typical year. They'll visit our Parliament. Similarly, so our members of Parliament, called Tynwald here, will visit other countries within the Commonwealth. So there's a real build-up and a sense of unity together. The Isle of Man, however, does have a close relationship with the United Kingdom, as the other Crown dependencies have. But since the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland some years ago, there's now a British Isles Council. And this is where there's an opportunity for those who are living in adjacent islands can come together and meet regularly and talk about common issues. So it's very important. So although we're a small jurisdiction, we're actively involved in a number of different areas, and a large political area, as well as geographically, locally. As I said, the Isle of Man is a common law system, and our court system, just to explain to you, is very similar to that elsewhere within the Commonwealth. We have our starting courts, which are magistrates, often JPs, who are not legally qualified, but they're trained, and they deal with matters such as criminal law, some family law matters. We have our High Court system here, which is split into different divisions, as you would expect. You have the family law, you have the civil jurisdiction, you have the criminal jurisdiction. We also have our own appeal court on the island. It's called the Staff of Government Division. No one knows why it was called it. It doesn't kind of fit into any other type of description, but it's been here a long time, so we've kept a name. Our final court of appeal is to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council, and therefore we move forward through, like many areas within the Commonwealth, who still have that as the final court of appeal. The legal profession here are advocates. That means it's a fused profession here. In Scotland, a barrister is called an advocate. In England, it's called a barrister. And elsewhere in the Commonwealth, you might have the two divisions, solicitors and barristers. But we, as advocates, can appear in all our courts. So sometimes we're robed within the higher courts, right down to tribunals and the minor courts, where we're de facto solicitors, as would be by comparison to the United Kingdom. However, many years ago, Tynwald, in its wisdom, that's our Parliament, decided we needed to bring in experience from other jurisdictions, and we have what's called a registered legal practitioner here. That's someone who is qualified within certain jurisdictions, and many of them have come from the Commonwealth, not just UK or Ireland, and therefore they can establish their business here. They have to maintain their own practice certificates within their own jurisdiction. They have to have a professional indemnity insurance of currently not less than 2 million, and therefore they apply for registration. Their range of services have, by virtue of them coming from a foreign jurisdiction, to be restricted. They tend to deal with general advisory work within the commercial field, and they cannot deal with conveyancing, can't appear in courts, etc. So you'll find that there's a good link between registered legal practitioners and local firms who can promote business together. We have a very rigorous regulatory regime here, both from the financial sectors right through to the policing, customs and excise. Being a small jurisdiction, we're often challenged and called out for that, but we are proud to be regularly meeting all the international standards before many of the larger nations have actually got anywhere near to doing so. So we've got regulated sectors, corporate service and trust service areas, pensions, insurance, banking, gaming, and I'm sure you've heard Andy mentioning that he's getting into cannabis. That's not for smoking or otherwise, that's really down to medical cannabis. And so that's another area of being regulated work within the Isle of Man. That's for consideration for medical purposes. Our legislation is business friendly, but we do not cut any corners with regards to anti-money laundering regulations. You've got a greater chance of being caught in this jurisdiction than in many of the larger jurisdictions. Why? We react quickly, our courts react quickly, and therefore it's easier to catch money going through this system in the Isle of Man because of that quickness than it is elsewhere. and therefore you face the same types of penalties as you would in other modern legal jurisdictions for anti-money laundering, for criminal activities, tax evasion. We have many arrangements with other jurisdictions where we exchange tax information exchange agreements. But all the above should not scare off an individual who's looking to relocate to the Isle of Man. Why? Because day-to-day business goes on. Those who are involved in criminal activity should not consider coming here thinking it's an easy place to get by on. But we're looking for good persons, good business, and something whereby we can all progress together with. My colleague Nick Presky was unable to be here today. He would have sat on the panel. He's with the Department of Enterprise, and he's asked me to say a few words about relocating. But I'm going to say at the end of it, if you have more specific details that you want to have answered, you should contact him at the website I will give you. But relocating to the Isle of Man, the first route is really the immigration route. If you've got British ancestry, you might qualify to come here. For those, for example, in Hong Kong, where there's a large number of individuals who are BNOs, British nationals overseas, then there's a facility to apply to come to the United Kingdom and also to the Isle of Man. And as part of our government's programme, they're looking to grow the community and grow the population by 15 to 20,000 over the next 10 years. So we are open for business. We're open for individuals to come here. And if you have that interest, please do so and contact our government agency for that. But there are other ways for coming to the Isle of Man. You might be a sponsored migrant. That sounds an unusual term, but it means that you've got a business abroad which is looking to either establish a branch here or indeed a standalone business. And therefore that may assist you looking to relocate to the Isle of Man because your employer is looking to establish a business here. So there's that opportunity as well. You heard the Minister at the start of this presentation today. We are a low tax area. There's no shame in doing so. Taxation was brought in to pay for the costs of government. We're the same here. We have a low tax area. We don't have inheritance tax. We never have had. We have got no capital gains tax. There's also a final opportunity here for high net worth individuals. You've heard my colleagues telling you the services that can be offered, but we do have, like a number of countries, tax capping, where there's a fee that you pay per year on your worldwide income. So I thank you for listening to me today. I'm about to hand you over to Martin Hall, my colleague from ATLA.
Thank you, Larry. My name is Martin Hall. I'm from ATLA Retirement Solutions, which is part of the ATLA Group, and we're headquartered in the Isle of Man and owned by Isle of Man business owners. We offer a range of financial services, audit, accountancy, advisory, fiduciary, and retirement solutions, which I'm here to talk to you about today. ATLA Retirement Solutions are regulated on the Isle of Man, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the high-level pension environment on the Isle of Man, really expanding on David, who touched on the use of pensions for wealth planning solutions. So the Isle of Man's a premier jurisdiction under common law, which Larry's touched on and is far better versed to talk about than myself. Modern legislation, robust, again, elements that Larry's touched on already. In regard to the taxation of international pensions on the Isle of Man, there's legislation carved out within the Income Tax Act, so that makes it a tax neutral environment for those wishing to save internationally in the Isle of Man. And as I touched on, ATLA are regulated by the Isle of Man regulator. There is a number of tiers to that regulation. So first of all, as a business, we're an approved business. As key individuals within that business, we're also vetted, and then the various schemes are approved by the regulator and also go through the site of the Isle of Man Tax Office as well. So there's many levels of robustness and protection ultimately for the end client in regard to that. So what opportunities are available? First of all, corporates and individuals can utilise the Isle of Man for pension planning. And then there's also, you'll see on the slide there, gratuity plans and savings plans, and we'll go into a little bit more detail around those in a few moments. I think just to revert back to the individual plans, there's also family planning opportunities as well. So if you wish to plan for the future or do joint pension schemes with your spouse, that's also available on the Isle of Man. All these schemes ultimately as well can be white labelled and customised. So certainly if you're looking at corporate schemes and you wish to carry a corporate brand, that's very possible as well. So we dig in a little bit to the international schemes for personal pension plans. A lot of these really been covered by the panellists earlier, but the advantages of these type of arrangements, you're looking at tax neutral. Benefits from the Isle of Man are paid gross. As I touched on, there's no taxation consideration on the Isle of Man. We've got flexibility around contributions. So you can make one-off payments, regular payments. You've got the stability of the Isle of Man, which again, the panellists have talked on. The AML regulations, again, provide robustness around the Isle of Man and what it can offer. Multi-currency, ability in there to contribute and also invest multi-currency, which again David touched on earlier. That's all possible from the Isle of Man. And then the flexible delivery system. So when we think about that, we think about how can you get your pension benefits out. And the legislation on the Isle of Man provides a lot of flexibility around taking lump sums or income payments. And it's about working with the clients and the advisors to see ultimately what works best for them, because all those options are available on the Isle of Man. In regard to corporate schemes, there's many advantages which I touched on a moment ago. The first being that having that centralised scheme in one location. So if you've got a business that multinational employees, many considerations around pensions because of the global footprint, you can keep that footprint in one location, being the Isle of Man, which very much simplifies the administration. And then the only consideration is the benefit delivery for the person taking the benefit at a later date. Tax neutral, which we've touched on already. Again, benefits are paid gross. Multi-jurisdiction, and then the wide investment powers. And again, the panelists have talked about the investment options that are there in regard to the pension scheme, and the powers within the pension legislation are very broad around around investments. So again, it's working with the client and the advisor to ensure that the needs are met and that income or further capital growth is generated for the future requirements. And then finally, just to touch on gratuity plans, they're quite common in the Middle East. Again, the pension legislation can be adapted and work around those gratuity plans and also savings plans. Again, still working within the same framework, but if you wish to make regular savings, if you're a mobile individual moving around the globe and want to make regular contributions or one-off contributions into a savings plan, again, the legislation can be, the deed can be drafted to ensure that the delivery of the benefits at a later date work for your needs. So again, very customizable. Hopefully that provides you a little oversight into the pension legislation on the Isle of Man. Thank you for listening, and I'll hand back to Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Well, now we have a Q&A session with our panel. So Yash, what are some of the considerations that internationally mobile families should be mindful of?
Well, firstly, planning ahead. I think that's a key component. And then, of course, finding the right partnerships to assist you with that particular process. One of the things that I found personally really helpful, given that I've recently relocated as well, is having a bank account in the jurisdiction that you're transferring to in advance. This helps you do some currency hedging well in advance of that particular move. So that's, in a nutshell, a few of the key considerations. Of course, it's not an exhaustive list of things to consider, but I think those are key ones that are really useful.
When should one start planning towards migration or relocation?
So we usually suggest approximately 18 months, depending on the countries that you're transferring from and tax implications before relocation. Sometimes it may be earlier than that, but 18 months as a rule of thumb is a fair amount of time to be able to make that move.
And finally for you, what's the benefit of a neutral jurisdiction for internationally mobile families?
Yeah, so perhaps let me just unpack. I mean, we've used the word tax neutral a number of times, and what does that really mean? It basically means that there's no taxes for non-resident individuals banking or investing, for instance, in the Isle of Man as a tax neutral jurisdiction. Of course, you may have to sort out those tax affairs in your country of tax residency from an investment perspective. But in terms of relocating, the Isle of Man is a great jurisdiction, tax neutral jurisdiction, to house the family wealth while the family moves around the globe. So the wealth stays in one place, but the family members can move around the globe and they have full access to that pot of wealth that they've created over those years.
Thanks, Nash, very much. David Bush from FIM Capital. You kind of touched on this about being a very turbulent year across the majority of asset classes. But how do you see the remainder of the year working out?
It's a really good question, and I think the short answer is volatility remains a big concern in the asset management industry, and primarily due to the Ukraine-Russia circumstances, which I think everybody agrees is very, 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 very poor. Because it's affecting supply chains of food. China, with their zero COVID, we've just seen an incident yesterday, fresh off the press, so to speak, in terms of the major Apple factory for production this year. And we're battling with an environment of super inflation in terms of, gas prices, petrol prices, food prices, etc. So the short answer is volatility is going to stay for the foreseeable future. However, we as a house think a lot of the bad news is starting to get built in now. For investors who've got assets, we should start seeing a more smoother environment for the investment journey. I'm not saying life journey, but investment journey. So I think for the rest of the year, probably less than what we've seen so far. And then going into next year, we should start seeing some building blocks for some good growth.
Okay, so how would you allocate pension assets across asset classes and geographies?
Once again, a really good question. I think, you've mentioned that basically it's so particular to the individual client where you are in your journey. I'd say straight away depends on the planning, the advice, age, profile. For example, younger clients might be more gung-ho in terms of using exotic assets alongside traditional assets. More mature clients might be using luxury assets, chattels, for instance, within a structure, which I believe are allowed in circumstances because of the flexibility, if they're not for personal use, along that lines. So in terms of where would we be diversified, I think any good asset manager would say we would diversify across as many as we can that are valid for the actual objective of the client, which we do, and ultimately across private equity, bonds, cash, gold, and property. The blend depends on the risk profile of the underlying client. We can cater for pretty much everyone.
And can you give us a number, an amount needed for a bespoke discretionary solution?
I'm going to go back to my presentation on this one. If you want a bot to run your money, it's a relatively low amount. For discretionary asset management, where it's a one-to-one human relationship, you're typically looking at amounts of more than $1 million US, or currency equivalent. And that's basically because, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of cost, there's a lot of oversight, there's a lot of control, there's a lot of regulation. And that one-to-one sort of environment is becoming, I'd say, unfortunately more expensive. But at the end of the day, I think the quality of the service by the industry that's delivered to clients is getting higher and higher every day. A lot of the lesser providers are getting squeezed out of the system, and the quality service, the quality returns, and the quality businesses are thriving. Yeah.
Okay, thanks so much indeed for that, David.
Thank you.
Moving on to Andrew, what are the responsibilities of the directors or yachting owning companies?
Yeah, so the vast majority of the world's super yachts are owned through corporate structures. The reason for that, to ring fence any liability that there's a risk on board the boat, that the shareholders' interests are protected through the corporate structure. But of course, once you have a corporate in place, then you need to have a director on the board of the entity. And ultimately, the director's role is to have complete oversight of all the day-to-day operations on board the boat, which extends from dealing with insurance matters, employing the crew, paying the crew, and of course take the liability when things go wrong. So for that reason, it's essential to have a service provider in place that knows what they're doing, that's experienced in dealing with yachting transactions, and has the expertise to oversee day-to-day operations.
Okay. Are you restricted as to where the clients reside or the businesses operate from?
Yeah, so much of what we do is dealing with the clearance of yachts into Europe for free circulation. Of course, in Europe, we have European VAT. And the type of corporate structure will vary depending on the client's personal circumstances. So as I touched on during the presentation, for example, non-EU owners are able to avail from temporary admission relief, which enables them to bring the yacht into Europe for up to 18 months without any obligation to pay VAT. If you're positioned within Europe, then you have an obligation to pay VAT. That could be if you acquire an asset outside Europe and then bring it in, it would be due at port of arrival into Europe, or at source if buying a new build within Europe. There's various different structures available. Much of what we do is through our other offices, such as Malta, where we're looking to facilitate the recovery of VAT using commercial structures. But certainly the big plus that we have in the Isle of Man right now is the ability to offer temporary admission structures.
Thanks so much. Moving to Larry.
Yeah.
Can you enforce in the Isle of Man a final judgment obtained in another jurisdiction?
Well, we have regulations and legislation within the British Islands to do reciprocity. That would mean that you have your judgment, say, obtained in Scotland, registered here with notice to the party, and then once it's registered, you can enforce it against an asset. But of course, that doesn't go worldwide or to members of the Commonwealth. In the traditional sense, if you have a judgment which is final and conclusive, say in India or otherwise, and you know you're pursuing assets here, you would come and issue proceedings on that judgment. So it's a fresh start.
Can foreign practitioners, are they entitled to practice law in the Isle of Man?
Well, I touched upon that in the presentation. Yes, there are. If you qualify within certain jurisdictions, effectively, you need to have a background in a similar type of law. If it's civil law, you couldn't unless you re-qualify here. But people who are qualified in common law jurisdictions hold practicing certificates of the appropriate level of insurance, and obviously a reference to get in. You can apply to register here and establish an office here and conduct certain work. And many have done so over the years and successfully too.
Okay, and finally for you, can an individual or a company represent themselves before courts and tribunals here in the Isle of Man?
Yeah, an individual can represent themselves. Being a typical lawyer, I don't think that's advisable because it's just kind of understanding what you should be doing and not doing. And you could lead yourself down a garden path and find there's no exit. In the company here, in the way you would do it is the company would pass a resolution to say that Marden Hall is lawfully authorised on behalf of the company to represent the company. So it is possible.
Okay. And moving on to Martin, can you provide a practical case study for our people watching this today?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I wouldn't represent myself, that's for sure, rather than a pro like yourself, Larry.
Thank you, Martin.
So, yeah, I think looking initially at the personal side of pension plans, the ideal kind of case studies are individuals in a certain location and they've got assets in another location and they don't want to repatriate it back home. So can they take it to a tax neutral location, put it in a nice protective wrapper for future retirement plans? So that's kind of one example. I guess on the corporate side, you're typically looking at, and I think I touched on in the presentation, things like the good example is an airline where it's got employees globally. And the question is, where do you house their corporate scheme? Do you put it in the headquarters of where the airline is, one of the jurisdictions of its hub, or do you put it somewhere tax neutral to keep it central and simple?
Okay. You, in your presentation, were talking about the Isle of Man government and the Department for Enterprise and how they work in collaboration with the private sector. But maybe you can expand on this a bit?
Yeah, so we heard from the Minister at the outset, I think just goes to show that the collaboration that's there. I've recently travelled to South Africa myself with the Chief Minister who was there to talk all things Isle of Man, and I think that's something that those coming to the Isle of Man or working with the Isle of Man or working with the panellists here will find that dialogue between the two sectors. There's a great collaboration there, and I think Larry touched on it. I think it's locate.im, which is their website as well, where they help relocate people here. And certainly if people want to reach out to them, I'd definitely suggest having a conversation. They're always willing to do that. So if you email, I think it's locate.def@gov.im. Obviously Google it and you'll find it on there.
Okay, finally then, what pitfalls should clients and advisors be looking out for?
I think the main thing, certainly when you're looking at pensions, is appropriate advice where needed. I think that's always important. And then the primary other one is investment, and it's pros like the panellists here that are an important part of that jigsaw to make sure the investments are liquid and suitable and work for the client and their retirement plans ultimately, Paul.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you, panel. Well, Julia, there you go. I hope that's been of interest to everyone in Hong Kong. The Isle of Man is a dynamic place to work, and the contact you can have between the government and private sector is just quite exceptional. Definitely worth investigating more. And I'm sure you've got questions yourself for our panellists here, and there'll be details that you can be providing, of course, to contact all of them. But now, from a beautifully sunny Isle of Man, back to Hong Kong.
Thank you so much. That was really great. It's rare to have a panel who can speak so knowledgeably and cover so many areas of expertise. I was particularly fascinated to hear from Larry that while the Isle of Man is not a member of the Commonwealth, the jurisdiction does maintain deep and unique ties with the Commonwealth through the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association and the common law legal system. What may be of interest to some listeners is the topic of relocation. Martin and Yash spoke at length about this and explained the benefits in detail, including the Isle of Man's tax regime and the employment relocation incentive package offered by the Isle of Man government. It was also interesting to hear from Andy about yacht-owning companies and the various restrictions which are faced. Finally, I do want to mention that it's always been a question of mine as to how does the Isle of Man set itself apart from other so-called offshore jurisdictions. Well, through this webinar, I think I've gained an insight that one of the Isle of Man's strengths lies in the dynamic public-private partnership and collaboration between the government, the Department of Enterprise, and the private sector. And for more important sectors of the Isle of Man's economy, it seems the jurisdiction is particularly unmatched in wealth management services. And of course, it sounds like it's a great place to live. Well, with that, we're now at the end of our webinar, and I'd like to give a huge thanks to our wonderful panel of speakers, to Paul and to Dr. Allinson for his opening address. And of course, I'd like to thank you, the audience, for joining us today. So I look forward to seeing you again soon, and may the rest of 2022 be happy and bright for you. Bye.